This is Alexa Linton, and you're listening to the Whole Horse Podcast. I'm coming to you from the Cowichan Valley on beautiful Vancouver Island in Canada, and I'm excited to be bringing amazing instructors from around the world to share their knowledge about all the ways that we can keep ourselves and our horses well and happy, and about some of the cutting edge techniques, training, and different aspects that are coming into the horse industry and changing it from within. I'm so excited you're here, and I'm excited about the times that we live in and the shifts that are happening in the horse industry before our eyes. Let's get started. Hey everyone, it's Alexa here, and you're on the Whole Horse Podcast. Today I am very happy to welcome back one of our first podcast guests. Josh Nichol is here with me. Welcome, Josh.
Glad to be here.
Yay. I'm so glad you're here as well. I recently got the chance to go and see Josh for his clinic on Salt Spring Island, and it was the first time I got to see him in action. And so I took a bunch of notes and messaged him that we had to talk about some of these amazing things. So this is why we're back today. We promised you we'd be back, and here we go. So yeah, Josh, thanks for being here tonight, and glad we could make this timing work.
Totally. Yeah, it's crazy getting our schedules lined up.
It really, really is. We thought we were like so lucky here to have figured it out so easily, and then we've had a few little glitches. But alas, here we are. Yeah. So Josh, tonight I really want to hash out more deeply some of these pieces of your work. When I went and saw you, it was for a very brief time. There was some real highlights for me that stood out. And as you said before we started, there's some of these that we could spend an entire hour on. So I'd love to, is there anything that's really pulling you through, like pulling you in terms of what we chatted about? It, the one that I'm really loving is this idea of the pressure to yield, rather than this idea of like a subservient giving up of the horse. And I'd love to chat more about what that means for you and what that looks like in terms of, in action.
For sure. If I could, I think that, when you had sent that list of things that you had observed in the clinic as kind of unique pieces to my style, I think one of the first things you had said was that you had kind of alluded to this topic that I quote often as this relational horsemanship. And I often talk about the difference between relational horsemanship and emotional horsemanship. And just to preface this to the question that you asked, but I define relational horsemanship as figuring out what a horse's needs are and meeting them. So any behavior that we see in our horses is a demonstration of an unmet need. And then, so if you see them pinning their ears or swishing their tail or showing levels of anxiety, this is a demonstration of an unmet need. So then it's our job to meet a need, to fill in and step in and figure out what our horse is looking for. Where relational horsemanship is a demonstration, well, the way we interpret when we see a horse present these same responses. So if they pin their ears or swish their tail, this is interpreted as an emotional response. And I lay over it the same emotional response that it would have been if it was me. It's then taken personal, and that therefore justifies emotional pressure. So it becomes the definition of a dysfunctional relationship. And it perpetuates itself, because then the horse, when we pressure the horses like that, they become defensive, and then they get bigger or they get scared. And then I take it more personal, and it just perpetuates this negative cycle. So as soon as we can, and that's why I talk about this so much, because as soon as we can change our view and change our perspective on how we look at the horse, it begins to empower an entirely different scope of how we handle them. So by looking at things and saying, wow, my horse is struggling, I have to meet a need, it immediately removes the emotion. And then I will use all of my everything I have to figure out what the horse needs. So the three needs that our horses have that I believe is that there's mind, space, and pressure. So horses need to know who's taking care of their environment. They have to know how to deal with pressure, and their language is spatial interaction. So we can talk about leadership and we can get into all these pieces, but I find that if any of these pieces need to be discussed first by interpretation. So if you're looking at it from a relational perspective, space is a mere conduit of communication. If you're talking about it from an emotional perspective, space is a dominance. A horse is not allowed in your space, and if they push on you, it's a disrespect, and it really amps it up. So the pressure piece is huge. And talking about the pressure piece, so we have mind, space, and pressure as the needs, and the pressure piece leads us to your question. And this was pressure to yield. And in regards to pressure and yield, a lot of times pressure is applied from an emotional interpretation, which creates total mud. B, it can be applied to maybe not, a person might not be emotional, but they're applying it in a more dominant way. So the horse has to give in, the horse has to move their feet. So it all again comes down to a viewpoint. Yeah. But not, in my estimation or my belief, until a person is able to see pressure or see a horse from a non-emotional perspective, and I mean this in regards to taking things personal and defining what the horse is doing emotionally, very difficult to support the horse in a positive way with our pressure. So this is where pressure and yield come in. Because if we look at herd dynamics, we see horses moving each other. And this often justifies dominance. This is often what justifies chasing horses in a round pen or really getting after them. When in reality, the horse interaction is that they are looking for yield in each other. It's not a chasing mechanism. Yeah. So we talk about the difference between predator pressure and herd pressure. I hope I'm not getting too thick.
I love this. Let's go here. Yes, this is important stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So the difference between herd pressure and predator pressure is that a predator is chasing them. And from a predator, the horse is in a sympathetic space and they're scared. Yeah. But in a herd dynamic, they are interacting. They want to be together, but they're trying to figure out who's going to take care of things if the chips are down, if the herd is in danger, who's going to handle stuff. So their interaction is non-emotional and it's also non-sympathetic. So the idea is that they're actually trying to sort things through. And so then the style that we need to regarding space and regarding pressure is that it can't be about fear. It can't be about chasing, but it has to entail yield. And so yield is the thing that they understand. So the herd dynamic is established by who yields to whom, not necessarily who chases whom. Okay, so it's not about chasing, it's about yield. So then this is where humans struggle, because I find people have a hard time sensing yield.
Totally. So, it's a very feely type space to find the line, I'm thinking, between what is chase and what is yield.
That's right. And this is why I take the lead rope with such high regard at this point. So a lot of my work in the riding and in the groundwork is that the rein, I don't use buckles on my halters or any type of thing that disconnects the flow from the lead rope to the headstall. And this is just my personal style, but the reasoning is that I want to keep a really true feel. So I'll connect the feel of the line, and one of the first things that I do with the horse is I'm going to connect the feel of the line. And the way I say it is that I always want to have within me what I would like to be within the horse. So I want to first off make sure there's a soft feel in my body, and then I'm looking to project or present that feel into the horse and wait until I can feel that sensation in them. This is a really important step because this is what separates the difference between softness and lightness. And
that was another question that I had.
It all starts blending together, right?
Yes.
And lightness is the external effect. So a horse, you can pressure a horse and they'll move very quickly. This I define as the internal effect. So it's the inside of the horse releasing and relaxing and feeling safe and feeling like they're in conversation, not dominated. So until a person can become acquainted with sensing through the lead rope or the bridle reins what an internal yield feels like, it's very difficult to start sensing the difference between lightness and softness when a horse is moving in the space.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the horse interaction, they can sense it all the time because they are the species. They're interacting with each other. It's their language. But for us, we're somewhat more disconnected from it. So I use the lead rope as a primary mechanism to feel the inside of a horse and sense that yield. So we start, I'm not exactly sure what horses you were able to watch, but
I didn't see many. I saw Mocha.
Okay.
And a little bit of the little mini that you were working with.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, those were the two main ones that I was able to see.
Yeah, I just can't remember because I know a couple of them were pretty dramatic on the first day. So
yeah, and Mocha was a really interesting one watching because subsequently I've actually gone and worked on her, and which was fascinating, to kind of see you work and then get my hands on her.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to remember what kind of horse you were talking about with her. And I want to get into this because you were sharing that there's sort of, that horses kind of have, one of these pieces that often rises to the surface.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
A mind, a space, a pressure, horse. And I can't recall what Mocha, what you'd said about her, but I want to say maybe mine. No, there was a horse that you worked with that was mine, a sort of a bay horse, I want to say. And it was fascinating to me because I saw so clearly in that horse how important it was that she knew that her environment was safe. And when you talked about that, I was like, oh my gosh, because I saw my mare in that mare. And the need that, like, okay, I don't have to be like fully concerned with, taking care of everything around me. I can actually relax and do these other things. And it was super, super obvious in that horse. So can you share a little bit more about what that would, how you would know what that would look like to have these different types of horses?
Yeah. So the three styles, obviously mind, space, and pressure. A mind horse is a horse that needs to know how to take care of their environment. You can often find these horses to be herd bound, where they just need their herd. They need to know who's taking care of things. And therefore the conversation with them has to be very thought directed.
Yep.
So then what I'll do is any use of pressure, any use of request will always be specific to the details of their thoughts. So I'm very quick to not necessarily focus on moving their bodies, but I will attend. So there may be something that they're looking at, and I'll present myself in the space, and then I'll try to draw their eye to me, and then let them feel how I'm feeling about that thing. So the problem that people run into with a mind horse is that they're trying to move their body, but the mind horse stays entirely focused on the thing that they're looking at. So then in their mind, you're not necessarily paying attention to what's important to them. And so then you can get on two different pages very quickly. And this is where herd boundness comes up, is that the horse's brain never left the herd. It never left the thing it was focusing on, but we tried to take its body with us. The idea is that, and this is kind of a premise, is that a horse's feet are always trying to go where they're thinking.
Yeah.
So, and if I can draw their mind to me, then the feet move simply. So then that's a premise to this, is to try to define that more deeply. And so then that would be the key to getting a mind horse, is that we could be able to connect our requests, whether it be a softening of the rein, a pressure applied, to a change in their thoughts, and that the thought would then slowly come towards me. A space horse is a horse who, anytime anything is, if they're unsure at all, they're going to push into your space. They're coming to look to you, and where a lot of times people say, oh, this horse is so disrespectful, they're always pushing on me. Where what I say is, this horse is in great need of clarity spatially when they become uncertain.
Right.
So they're going to come in, and it's almost like they're saying, like, do you have this, or do I have to take care of it? Oh, I'm hoping you have it, because I don't really want to take care of it, but they're always kind of engaging you. And so then they really need that clarity. So as soon as you can switch that gear, then it's an unemotional acceptance of that need. And then there's no argument and there's no emotion. So, and then the pressure horse is a horse that, and this again leads us back to that same conversation we were kind of trailing towards, is a pressure horse is a horse who they need to know how to control pressure. So they will become very scared. They can be very spooky, bolting, these things where they just get really scared and they have to do something with it. So if a pressure horse is not handled or helped, they will go to their self-preserving nature.
Yeah.
And so then if you try to dominate that, you might be able to dominate them. And this is a little bit about the sacking out approach, where what we're trying to do is get them to handle pressures. The reality is that what ends up happening is they go inside themselves.
Yeah, they just shut down.
Yes. So that's where I don't necessarily like to just expose horses to pressure. I do expose them to pressure, but there has to be a medium of understanding how to think and yield to pressure.
Yes.
So there always has to be, so I always say this, it's not a joke. It sounds like a joke, but I'm never trying to take control from a horse. I'm trying to give them what they need to control. And then they don't mind being with me. Okay. So if I can continuously give my horse what they need, why do they want to leave? And so then this is the idea that I'm trying to meet their needs. So with pressure, they have to know how to control their pressure mentally. And so then that pressure would be controlled by mentally being engaged in the conversation, and secondly, through yield. And when a horse can control pressure by yield, it immediately becomes more of a relational perspective instead of a dominated perspective.
Right.
So that then starts to circle the wagons on this whole concept of why I do what I do. So lightness and softness. Lightness often is the external, softness is the internal. And when we can approach them in such a way where we meet those needs, oh my goodness, all of a sudden the horses turn loose. And now they can feel safe with you. And for me, there is no physical work done until the horse's needs are met. Because as soon as there is, you're trying to work the body before the mind, before you have the inside of the horse released. To me, you're just taking from them.
Yeah. And we see that so often, right? It's like you see someone go, oh, I'm just going to chuck them in the round pen and run them for a bit. Exactly. And they're just like running scared, or they're not paying attention, or they're looking at their herd the whole time. They're getting very fit, maybe.
Sure.
But they're not in a mind space, to balance that. And totally. I think it's very common.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the great challenge with it, is that when a horse is in a sympathetic state, when they're scared, they're developing sympathetic muscles.
Yeah.
So they are learning how to tighten their top line, and they are bracing their back, they're hollowing themselves,
Yeah.
And so really when a horse is being moved around in a pen with that mentality, you're creating an upside down posture and building negative muscles.
You're essentially building imbalance into your horse.
Totally, totally. I talk about the top line of a horse as the sympathetic line, and the underline of the horse is the relational line. And the reality is, and I think this was actually made this way with some higher power on purpose. And the reality is that if you can't meet a horse's needs, you can't turn the top line off, and then you aren't given the relational line. So the underline can only be given when you take care of the top line, and that's by taking care of the mind first.
Yeah, and that's softness.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to know the physiology behind that? Let me check out on you for a second. So what happens is, under all the rib heads on the back are the sympathetic ganglions, right? So the moment, and it's the same with us, so when we breathe in and we go like this and we externally rotate the ribs, the sympathetic ganglions are activated. And when we breathe out, and that's why breathing out is so relaxing, right? We're just like, everything, breathing in is activating, breathing out is releasing. But yeah, when our horses go into that upside down pose, they're essentially staying in sustained sympathetic ganglion activation over a period of time. And so it's actually physiologically true as well, is that, and then as the back relaxes, so to speak, that those rib heads come off the sympathetic ganglion, you get that parasympathetic activation happening and relaxation. So
yeah, very cool. Awesome.
Cool, right?
Awesome. Yeah, it
Yeah.
all plays together, doesn't it?
It really, really does. So I'm just loving that new perspective on like relational line and
Right.
sympathetic line, because it just
Yeah.
makes so much sense in the whole. So
Right.
thanks.
Well, and then that's where, you can then start schooling a horse, because once they're back, and that's why, over how many thousands of years, the relaxation of the top line is a key principle, both as an expression of calmness, but also as a preparedness to be schooled, because then the underlying can start to activate, and the longus colli and the muscles that the engagement is needing are now activatable.
Yeah.
Which I just think it's so cool, because the horse, it's like, I always jokingly say, it's like you just don't get the goods. You don't get the horse until you've taken care of them, until you've taken care of their greatest need. And I think that's a beautiful creation. I think it's so great that way, that you can't just take it from them. So if you try to take it, all you get is the head and neck, and you'll get a frame.
Yeah.
You can get their chin, and you can kind of make it look sort of, but you're not getting the throughness. You're not getting the whole package. So I'm glad that it was made that way.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting having seen so many horses that have, built like these compensatory patterns due to their sympathetic overloads, due to these, ways of traveling, and then they and not reaching this softness point. So tell us a little bit. I mean, I'm sure people out there are very curious how, what are some of the ways that you find that softness, that you cultivate that softness in a horse? And I'm assuming it's different for each one of these types of horses.
Yes, for sure. Well, the first thing is there has to be an understanding of what the horse's first need is. Because so this is the reason why I end up speaking more need-based rather than technique-based.
Totally.
Because you have to understand what individual you're dealing with. And without that, it's very difficult to know how to train or how to work them. I have this process that I go through that I call mapping. And so once I know what the horse needs, and let's just say that in general, I've met the basic need, and I've helped the horse get to a place where they're able to kind of, what I find is a horse will get to a place where they'll look at me and they'll kind of say, you have something neat to offer. And they give you a couple minutes of intention. And it's at that point that you can really start working in. So what I do is the first thing that I'll do is I'll take the general effect of my lead, and I'm looking to feel their head and neck. Now, the one place that when I ask for this is I'll ask a horse to connect. I'll connect to the rein. And a lot of times people believe what I'm doing is I'm trying to get the horse to lower their head, but I'm not necessarily trying to make them lower their head. I'm trying to feel, because the way I look at it is horses are extremely honest. So whatever thoughts in their mind is firing the musculature in the body. So where we can try to hide what we're thinking, I can be very sad and I can be trying to smile because I have that sense to try to play the game, where the horse doesn't really know that. They're just feeling and reacting. So if they have an anxious thought, then they have tense muscles. And so the idea is if I can connect to those muscles with the feel through my hand, then I'm actually talking to the thoughts. And that's the way you can actually get mentally connected to the horses. There's other ways to connect mentally, but in regards to a softness, as we're talking about softness, the first ability is to be able to connect to those muscles and then have within you the feel you want to be in the horse, connect there, and let the gradient flow from you to them instead of from them to us. So what I mean by that is that most of the time, one of the best examples that I can give regarding this is, let's just say you're super happy and I come and I'm very grumpy, and within 10 minutes, I'm not so grumpy anymore and you're still happy. That meant that your degree of happiness or your energy within your happiness was so much greater than my grumpiness that the gradient flowed from you to me.
Yeah.
But if my grumpiness was greater, then you would become grumpy and I would still be grumpy. So the idea is that energy is always moving.
Yeah.
But most of the time what happens is if a person picks up a rein and a horse is tight and they're pouring a degree of energy into it, all of a sudden the person is tight, because we aren't necessarily connected to what I call energetic leadership, which is that I have the ability to direct what I'm doing within myself. So the key to first being able to direct a softness is to be able to connect to what the horse is feeling, and then pour the feeling you would like them to have. So when you feel the musculature starting to release, it means that gradient's starting to flow from you to them. Instead of, if you're tightening up, it means it's going the other way. So the horse is then leading you energetically. So the first key is to feel them taking on the feel of you, which then will cause them to start lowering their head. But that's because the musculature started releasing. The sympathetic musculature started to let go. So a lot of times I find people get this idea that they need to bring the horse's head down. The horse will release their head as low as they want to. Some horses will lower it an inch, some not even, hardly anything, and some will drop it right to the ground and yawn and lick and chew. To me, it's no consequence. But I want to feel that release. So that is step one.
Okay. And I'm assuming in there, just I don't want to cut off here, but
no problem.
It feels like there's this real kind of onus on the person, the rider, to really cultivate a self-intelligence, a self-regulation practice, to be able to even be that anchor, and be able to be kind of in the giving space in that partnership. Hey.
Yeah, it really is true. And that's one of the reasons some people like me for this and some people don't like me at all, because I do say, if you want to lead, because my definition of leadership is that I present something that you want. I present a space that makes you feel comfortable and you want to follow me. It's not that I have to make you. And so then that's the difference. Is there's this real sway in the word leadership, that leadership is a guise for dominance. And because you need to lead the horse, that means you got to make them listen and you got to do all this stuff. But the reality is in no place on the planet is leadership in its truest form is not taken. It's never taken. No. It's earned. So that's kind of where that starts to come into play, right? Is so that what I'm doing is I'm trying to, in all the levels of leadership, and I have kind of a whole progression to that, but in regards to energetic leadership, softness at its root means that I have within me what I'm trying to offer the horse. And so then that again brings in this like self-growth piece where I have to be working on what is going on inside of me. And without that, the horses don't trust me, because then I have to make their outsides listen. You see, if I want them to do stuff and I'm not actually doing it, then I have to dominate them.
Then to look like you're creating lightness on the outside, but then the softness isn't actually there.
And dominance has to be, because then they're not sensing in you what they would want to follow. So then they try to leave, and then I have to make them stay, right? So it starts to make sense why various styles start to develop.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. One of my guests right at the beginning was Elsa Sinclair, and she does this full on, like fully free kind of know anything.
Cool.
And it was fascinating to talk with her, because she said at the end of the day, that horse, the reason she wanted to be with me was because I created a space where she could relax. And I was like, whoa, of course. She says, in most dominance leadership, there's so much pressure applied that if you didn't have that lead rope there, they'd leave. They couldn't actually handle that experience without that tie to you. And it was a real wake-up call for me. And it sounds like that's really what you're getting at here, is the sense that, and I actually saw it in person. I mean, I wasn't there for very long at that clinic, but I saw, especially the one horse, I think it was Mocha, be like, oh my God, I want to be with you. This feels so nice to be with you. And it was really like touching, actually, to watch her find safety and held space in that moment.
Totally. Well, and that's the goal, right? So number one, I'm trying to offer that deal. I'm working at it in my own life as often as I can in every way. And then secondly, I look at all of the aids, whether the bridle reins, the halter, as ways to connect the inside. So they're just a heightened sense of connection and intimacy, not control. And so that's why when we start talking about the riding, and I go through with great depth what the reins are and what they are not. And the reins are not to make the horse do stuff. Now, obviously, there's the 10% where it's just about not dying, because we all have
Totally.
parts. But,
I was just having this moment of like, oh yeah, Diva, when I was riding her bareback in the field yesterday, and both the other horses galloped up behind me, and she was like,
yeah, totally. And you're glad they were there.
Use my reins in a kind of dominant way to just avoid.
But whatever, right? Like, it happens. It happens, right? So I say the 90-10 rule is 90% of the time you're trying to do the best you can with them to add and heighten yield or softness, and 10% you do what you have to. But that's the reality, is that the more connection you have, so the halter is an external connection, the side pull is an external connection, the hackamore is an external, the bit, it becomes more internal, and you're then touching the inside of the horse's mouth, which is then, to me, not more control, but it's a heightened sense of connection and intimacy. It's like you can feel more of them. There's more life and energy in the mouth. So to me, it's like it just becomes more beautiful. And actually, it's something that I really try to talk about a lot. And it's this idea of trying to unemotionalize all of the aids, because there's a real sense in a movement. And you and I, when we first connected, we were talking about the whole laying down concept, and it's such a big piece for me, is this idea of let's just remove all the negatives from every single aid, and let's look at what they can do really, really well, and use them fully in that, and give that back to them. And then be very careful with what their cons are, whatever their negatives might be. Let's become educated about each of those pieces and try to use them for their value. And I think that what ends up happening with a lot of the gear is that it's like people look at it and think, and it's not to say that doing nothing or not having anything is not an amazing thing, the Liberty work, and it's all beautiful.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
But to understand each of the pieces, right?
Yeah.
And it just makes it so cool. So,
well, and I think you and I share a bit of a passion for the California bridle horse movement, and so we've both probably ridden with spade bits in our horses' mouths, and a lot of people would look at that and just say, "Oh my God, that's crazy." And yes, to me, when that bit went in my mare's mouth for the first time, I was like, okay, I hold connection to something I've never had before in my hands with this mare. Like, it was a powerful moment, and to feel her like pride come up and carrying that bit, and just the sense of responsibility in me that it actually cultivated was actually quite like potent and real for me,
Totally.
And I know that a lot of people would look at that equipment and go, how could you?
Totally. Well, and I feel like I've become such an advocate for that of the California style is I love it. I love the classical style. I love high horsemanship. I think that's what I feel is I'm called to I just want to know what it means to do something at its highest form of connection, of meeting needs, of using the aids well, and to represent, because I just really feel like there's a real saturation of emotionally defined everything. Whether it's bits or the spade, people, the first thought that people see is it's just this big beast, right? When there's just not an understanding of its intimacy, its beauty, it's the graduation of how much connection and relationship is built to get to it. And it's all, and I think there really needs to be a lot of clarity there.
Agreed.
With all of it, right? Of education instead of emotional definitions.
I went entirely tangential here, and you were getting on a roll with some pieces around working with horses. You were about to say the second thing, and I don't know if you remember what you were going to say.
oh yes. So we had just discussed a softness through the rein, and then trying to make sure that we were on page with what we offer and then what the horse is feeling. So when they drop their head, it's not about the head, it's about feeling the musculature release. So trying to become connected to the inner workings. And so that's directly down. And I had kind of just discussed the idea of mapping. So
Yeah.
mapping the horse is that you have the ability to feel what's going on in the pole. You can feel in your hand what's happening through the cervical joints. You can start feeling the energy through the withers and the musculature there, and then the back, and all the way to the hindquarters. So in general, I talk about it in 3 different ways. Is the first is sensing everything that connects sort of to the nuchal ligament. So from the pole to the withers, it will be felt by asking them to where your hand comes directly down. The key is it's not ever down and towards their chest. As soon as you come down towards the chest, they start to actually just overdo muscles.
Yes.
They're not actually releasing the back. So first is directly down. Second, to talk to the shoulder, is down and slightly forward. So there's a lot of horses, and this had happened at the clinic actually, is there was a couple horses that they would drop their head or they would release their neck. But as soon as I asked them to let go of the shoulder, it was like I was talking to a boulder.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of horses that know how to bend their necks and give their necks. And this is often looked at like it's a very positive thing.
Yeah.
And on one hand, it is, but it can be very overdone if the yield does not continue to progress through the body.
Totally.
So then I say down and slightly forward, and then feel that. It's like, and then sense that you're trying to reach into the shoulders.
And where do you, when you're doing that, just give me a little bit of perspective. Where are your hands? Where are you asking from?
So I will usually, when I'm working the head, the neck, I'll usually have my other hand on their neck somewhere.
Yeah.
And then so if the horse was in front of me, this hand would be on the lead, and I would just be gently feeling, and the other hand would be on their body, trying to give some sense of what I want, so that I'm trying to create a better loop. And then when I'm looking for them to drop to work on the shoulders, I'll put my hand on the shoulder, and then I'll take my lead rope hand down and then slightly forward.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I'm trying to sense the release of the shoulders, because it's really important that we can just become connected to what, we talk about moving the parts and connecting to the parts, but a lot of times people don't sense the parts. They're not sensing what's going on within them. And feeling the muscles release is just such a big deal to being able to get them to work right.
Absolutely.
This is a thing I actually get into quite a bit with the therapists that I work with, is that, so a therapist will work the horse and get them fixed. Then the rider will pick the reins up, and the reins trigger an old state of mind, and the horse braces. Yeah. And then almost immediately, whatever the therapist did is now gone.
Yes.
Because the muscles tightened and pulled all the bones and all the muscles back into this tension. So we have this transition phase we discuss, and that's where the mapping really plays its best. So if I can get the definition of the aids to support the release the therapist produced, now we have a real punchy environment, because now the training and the therapy is congruent.
Big time.
So we say down for head and neck, down and slightly forward with the lead, trying to feel for that yield. In the beginning, what you want to do is you want to sense the horse lean forward and then take a soft step as they lower their head.
Okay.
And then what I'll do is I'll put my hand on their shoulder, and I'll take my hand slightly forward, and then I'll actually bring my hand a little bit behind me almost, and then I'm looking for the hindquarters to step around. So I'm trying to feel, what I want to feel is I want to feel the sacrum start to move. Yeah. And I want to feel the inside hind leg step under with freedom and looseness. Okay. Yeah. So then I'm slowly working my way. Now the mapping process becomes very thorough. I'm giving a very general overview, but we'll work our way until you can actually feel, them give on many different levels. Right. But that's I usually package it initially in 3 phases for people to be able to just kind of digest the concepts. And then we move into more specifics. But that would be when we're talking about softness and we're talking about getting a beginning sense of it. That's the way. And then to lay on top, going back to your pressure question, then what I will do is I will then map the horse with the application of pressure to see where they store their greatest unmet need.
Interesting. Okay.
So
I want to hear about this.
yeah. So what happens is just like us, we all have
Yep.
had pressure applied and great pain or negativity stored up within our bodies based on how we interpreted it. And then our own journey is to work through that and sort our stuff out. And what happens with the horses is that, so it's very similar, and they store this in their bodies. So they will have anxieties, and then when a horse gets real anxious, they'll tighten their hip up real heavy, and some of these horses would then buck, or whatever would come because of the degree of tension that they applied. So what happens is it's actually then the application of the pressure that starts highlighting or bringing out where the horse wants to hold these tensions. So if I've done a good job of my mapping, then the horse is already in the mind frame of softening. Then what the idea is to use just enough pressure. So it has to be enough pressure that they care, but not so much that they get scared.
Yeah.
So I want to apply just enough, and then what I'll do, excuse me, is then I'll go through my mapping. And some horses, you'll start and you'll apply a little pressure, and their head and neck softens, their shoulder softens, and it's like a big rock on their hip. They will not step under like they used to.
Yeah.
So now you know that the basis of the training is going to specify release in this horse's hindquarters, and it is in the application of pressure to yield, not pressure to movement. Because if you use pressure and ask the hip to move, it would move, but it's not softening. And there's the difference.
Yeah.
And that's where softness makes its greatest play, is that if you can start feeling how a horse is moving and you can sense when that body part actually releases, effective leadership amplifies tenfold. Okay. And the next horse, you have them soften, they'll soften their head and neck, and then they'll soften their shoulder. And as soon as you apply pressure, they will not give their head and neck. Nothing. They will move, but they will stay tight. They will even be super light. And that's where Mocha started. When I started working with her, she was super responsive the first day, like move if I just turned my body, she was moving, but rigid. So when I stopped, and I actually stopped, and I just put my hand on her, and I was really like saying, hey, I'm not just asking you to move. And I had to actually almost say that to her, like, whoa, just stop here.
Take a moment.
Yeah. Just stop.
Well, and it's interesting looking at a horse like her, because, she has so much try, and she has been in, environments where she, was probably sort of under some fairly punitive, sort of scenarios where there was some real consequences to her not being light, quote unquote.
Sure.
Right.
Well, and it's such a common thing, right? Like that lightness is so sought after, and that lightness and softness are used as the same word. So if a horse is very responsive, then we would call them that they're very soft, or if the horse is able to give a little bit, then they're soft, but not necessarily speaking to that internal dialogue. So yeah, it becomes such a big deal, and we're kind of scratching the surface on it, which I like that it's kind of all coming together a bit. It's a lot to talk about, but it really does circle the wagon, so to speak, on why I feel so convicted to work horses the way I do.
Yeah, and I love, I've always, I think, struggled to find where that piece of, the self-awareness arises within the horsemanship itself. And, I love that you've actually like really brought it, full circle, and you can really see within this understanding, like, oh yeah, like it is critical. It's the basic building block of this relational horsemanship. So
yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
How you present yourself is how you present yourself. It doesn't matter if it's a person or a horse or a dog or whatever. As soon as you feel pushed upon or take something personal, then you will start revealing yourself. And then that's where the biggest play of the style really comes in, is that if we don't change if we don't change how we're thinking, A, how we think, and then B, how we respond, then our horses are never going to stop being self-preserving. And then a dominant style has to be. If you want the horses to do something, you have to dominate them then, because they are going to always want to run away from you.
Yes. Yes, for sure. For sure. And, you know, I think that sense of, you know, really, really like arriving within our own self and knowing our own self. I mean, it's a scary place. It's not an easy place to travel to. You know, we start to realize, I know for myself, and I've talked about it on here before, but I realized like I have a temper. You know, that's how the taking personally shows up in me. Is my temper, right? And you know, that's been something I've really had to work within myself. You know, and it's not a nice thing to look at. You're just like, oh, it's easier being like, no, they, you know, like that's what I had to do. That was, you know, they totally deserved that or whatever, you know, like rather than like, oh no, I'm just being awful.
Sure. Well, exactly, right. But that's the beauty of emotional horsemanship. Everything can be blamed on anybody. You know,
Totally.
It's not my responsibility. I don't need to make a change. The horse needs to shift, right? And I think that's the biggest key. And I also believe that when you really start doing this work, when you get to a place in yourself where you recognize what I had to let go of and how hard that was, you can now sympathize with asking a horse to get past their self-preservation.
Full on. And
most people can't relate to it because they're not going in, they're always running away, so to speak, from their own tenderness or you know, their own inner struggles. So then we can try to force a horse to work through it without any respect for what we're asking. And I think that's the thing, is that the more I get into my own stuff and I realize, wow, it's not easy, I have more empathy for asking my horses to do it. But then they also see it in me and they can feel that I'm doing the thing that I'm asking them. And whether it's people or horses, as soon as they can feel in you that you're personally doing the thing you're asking them to do, it changes the gradient. It changes everything about the conversation. So it's big stuff.
Wow. And, you know, I see that as, you know, here we are traveling through the world with our own coping mechanisms, our own, you know, things that we're packing around, you know, and, you know, hearing you say, you know, oh, by recognizing those patterns, by recognizing those potentially, you know, not working coping mechanisms, but survival. I mean, these coping mechanisms came for us out of survival.
Totally.
You know? That also honors the challenge, you know, that it is to change something so deeply ingrained, like a prey animal, you know, going literally against their natural instinct.
Totally. And most of the time people, they don't appreciate what we're asking them. We don't appreciate and then how willing they are to do it 90% of the time, even though everything in them is saying, this isn't a good idea. This isn't a good idea. But when you start working through your own stuff and everything in you is saying, this is a terrible idea, you should run. Don't let this stuff be exposed. You know, what are you doing? Is it the same? Because you're getting to that primal level. You're getting to that place where we're all the same. And when you can get to that place where you're all the same, where you can see yourself that we're all on this planet working to feel safe, to be at peace, to be accepted, to have relationship. It's like, we're all the same. And
connected. Yeah.
And when you start walking that's when we start getting to a place where, in my estimation, true leadership is accessible, because you're giving off what you're looking to receive or what you're looking to create an environment around you.
Wow.
So so cool.
I love it. It's amazing. I'm sitting here with like my mouth wide open going, oh my God, I need to ask questions, and I'm just needing to process this. because it really does tie up so many loose ends. And
Mm-hmm.
it does. I've come from a lot of different places in terms of like equine facilitated learning and my equine therapy, and this idea
Right.
around congruency
Mm-hmm.
and what feels safe in a horse, that they, and by congruency, you talked about it a little earlier, it's like that sense of human beings are able to cover up what they're truly experiencing.
Totally.
It's actually a coping mechanism that we have,
Totally.
right? This is a very good coping mechanism. I can be like coming across super happy and just be raging inside, and my horse will know.
Well, they have to.
Right?
Yeah, they need to figure that out, because that's how they figure out if they're safe or not.
Yeah.
It's such a big thing for them. But the problem, and that's the thing, is that's what creates such dis-peace. So we've taught ourselves to put on a face, but the result of it is that our energy is moving in a very negative way. So there's always this sense of anxiety. So most of the world is constantly living in a state of dis-peace, which horses are constantly irritated by. So if a horse is in dis-peace, so if you take them from their buddy, they're trying to get back. They are not settled, and they will continue to try to work towards creating peace. Where for us, we just start living in it. And then we start blaming it on stuff, and we start chasing it and then striking out, instead of really processing, what does it mean to have peace?
And what does that even feel like in my body?
Totally. Right?
Yeah, well, and for most people, if we get really into all this, like, how many people are actually living in their body at all?
Totally.
Right? And to ask a horse to trust a connection to a being that is not connected to their body is a terrifying prospect.
It's a crazy thing.
Right?
Thus why dominance was created in horsemanship.
It had to have been, to do anything.
Mm-hmm. If you're trying to do two things, if you're trying to do it faster than relationship builds it, so that's a little bit of the Western world. We love to do things very quickly, and we say we're accomplished when we can get stuff done really fast. So you can get on a colt in half an hour, or you could, do these kind of things. So that's one side of it, is that you then have to create a level of submissiveness or dominance. And the other side is if you're not making a change inside, and you have to get the horse to give in. And that's where a lot of the submissive approaches then come. And I kind of began there in some ways, just really, really creating a space where I was making a horse give, but then, feeling like I had to throw up in my mouth, I just I couldn't settle.
You couldn't reconcile.
No. And then that started my own journey. And then it just starts to snowball. Once you start recognizing what peace feels like for yourself and your horse, it's like, oh my goodness.
It's a rabbit hole.
The rabbit hole, man.
Well, and one of the things I wrote down was this idea of losing the soul through submission.
Yeah, totally.
Which I thought was, such a potent way of putting it.
Totally. Well, and people get used to it. So then we try to impose that upon everything we're around, because we're not used to finding peace. Well, hey. And so the essence of relational horsemanship right there.
Yeah. And creating a real expressed, connected being, not even creating, just remembering that about our horses. And that's who they are. That submission can create, what I call the robot horses. It's the only way. They're in learned helplessness. There's no right answer,
Totally.
So we see them lose that shine. Yeah.
100%. Anything that lives in dissension, where their insides and their outsides are not the same, and we learn to accept that as real or normal, it becomes a learned helplessness. You've divided yourself, and that's really what. So the style is either I have to dominate my horse so they will do what I say, or I have to meet their needs so they will not be fearful of the things I ask of them.
Yes.
So then there's where a horse can be united with themselves. But people are the same. I go and I do all the stuff that I don't want to do. And I'm doing, I'm learning to live divided versus trying to figure out what does it mean to be congruent. So.
That's really cool. Yeah. And then Wow. Yeah. Bringing it all together in that congruency place. And I mean, that's a place where we can truly live, right? We're actually in our feeling space. We're, cultivating, moving ever closer to a sense of peace.
That's right. And that's the beauty of it, is that all things on the planet are calling for that, or looking for it, or seeking it. And that's really where you get into the spiritual conversation, because
Absolutely.
There's just, why is that? Like, why is everything seeking this peaceful, space of connection? It just starts to resonate on a higher plane. So that is a whole other conversation.
I was going to say, next podcast. We've already got our next podcast lined up.
Awesome.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Wow. And one of the last things that I wrote down here was this idea of a turn loose point. And I heard you mention it a little earlier. So I know that we're kind of coming back into like the more training portion of all of this. But yeah, can you share a little bit about what that means for you?
Turning loose, I will often use this in as a connection to people and horses, and it does kind of sum up what we're discussing. When turning loose is when the insides and the outsides become the same, and the horse is all of a sudden able to be themselves and is comfortable inside of their skin in my presence, or in someone's presence, or when a person is, all of a sudden there is a joining. And there is an energetic explosion when the two finally come together, and there's not this gears rubbing against each other, and all of a sudden everything starts to resonate and the gradients become even. And for horses, this is where all of a sudden they just start dumping. They will, sometimes they fall asleep. I've had them lay down right in front of me. I've had, yawning, all these things that can happen. And because they just all of a sudden feel that they're safe, and their insides and their outsides turn loose. So it's kind of like this connection. And I'm seeking this in people too. That's kind of my mentorship program, or my mentoring style is trying to get to a place where, we're just trying to figure out, what does that mean? What does it mean? And what are the horses guiding us to? And what are we learning? And, but yes, that would, the small definition of turning loose is where, our insides and our outsides become the same, and peace is the outpouring of it.
Wow. My assumption is this unlocks kind of this amazing potential, staying within, both the horse, the person, the partnership.
Totally.
Wow.
Yeah. When a person is always acting in dissension, when their outsides and their insides are doing different things, we can never, ever understand what our passions are, what our giftings are, what our uniqueness is, because you're powering your energy to, it's almost like you're powering dark energy. You're pushing it on a negativity. You're trying to hold a negativity versus any energy working into just showing who you are. Because the problem is vulnerability is the key to uniqueness, is that if I can't be vulnerable, then how could I ever show my uniqueness? How could I ever show my own gifting? So it all plays back into this style, right? It's like it all comes together, man. And so for us to turn loose is and this is where the whole process of mentoring people towards their authenticity, because people come to me and they want to follow their dreams, and they have these thoughts, but yet they have this system inside their body that will never allow them to get there.
No. Because
they're so disconnected, and their energy is working to all these other avenues, right? So creating alignments, creating awareness to that, all of a sudden your energy is powering. And you can tell when a person is able to be vulnerable, when a person is able to just be in a space and it's okay, all of a sudden, and that's when you can start seeing energy work powerfully towards a uniqueness and a gifting. But if there's guardedness and hesitate, all these, it just ends up being a bit of a slower process, because you don't have as much of you working towards that endpoint.
Exactly. So it's like this full alignment and this flow, it sounds like, of, they're just moving, right? Like, that's a powerful vision. I really want to hold that. And I love how it's so, isn't it amazing how everything is in everything. Like I think of my osteopathy work, and it's all about, releasing the barriers to flow.
Totally.
And opening that up so that the body can fully express itself in health. And this is the same thing. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I always think of things like there's this kind of, I say the word universal, and I think sometimes seems spooky, but it's like there's this universal way. There's this way that the world was made, and that anytime any of us get inside of it, and every animal, every person, is when you start getting inside of that way, it's like there's this crazy, awesome excitement and peace, and it just creates alignments, and it creates awareness, and people become empowered, and it's the same. It's the same for horses. It's the same for people. It's different because we're different creatures, but it's the same generic needs. When needs are met, peace is established, vulnerability is then okay, and then giftings just start to light up.
Well, and and at that point, ironically or beautifully, it gets easy.
Totally.
That's where it just gets like real fun and juicy.
Yeah. Well, you start seeking it because
totally.
It's
right? Like it feels so great. You're like, let's go there.
Yeah. Totally. So, I want that to be free.
Yeah, completely.
Wow, awesome. Thanks for helping me see that. Instead of, hey, let's not go there.
Yeah. It's just such an easier way to live. Well, what a great conversation, Josh.
Awesome.
Just so love these conversations.
Yeah.
Many more to come.
Yeah, cool.
Hey, we could keep going on, everybody, but I think we'll start to bring it to completion here. Josh, I just want you to once again share, how do people get in touch with you?
Well, predominantly, I guess our website, joshnichol.com.
Perfect.
And we've been working really hard to, for the years I just did clinics, and I found that really was not enough connection. So then I started my mentorship program, and that was awesome, but it still wasn't enough connection for a greater population. So started building our website, and the website allows people to get a sense of who I am. And now we've got the membership forum. So that's been just super awesome, because I'm just weekly giving information, and it's created, we've been going now for a year and a half. I guess December will be 2 years. And so the amount of info on there now, the videos and the forum and everything, it's just becoming quite saturated. So the great part for me is that I don't feel like I'm dropping the ball on my students anymore.
Yeah.
Is that by going and seeing them one time a year, it's the opportunities there now. That's how I've looked at it. So yeah, my website is probably the best way, and then we can, we'll do our best to help anybody with whatever their needs are.
Yay.
If you're inspired by this style.
Yeah, and if you are, on the clinic route, then take advantage. It's from what I've seen, it looks amazing. I think I would like to take part at some point here with my mare, and
awesome.
I'm just really happy you're doing the work you're doing in the world.
Well, thank you. It's been quite the journey.
Oh, I can believe it. You gonna write a book sometime soon?
We'll see.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Josh, for being here tonight. And
yes, always a pleasure.
Awesome. And just really want to thank everybody for tuning in and taking the time out of your day to listen in today. And I'm sure me and Josh will be back sometime soon to share more. So tune in then. And also next time we've got some great things coming up. All right. Cool. Have a great night, everybody.